Some men wear a police badge to protect the innocent. Others wear it as a license to play God. Officer Brooks Teller believed his uniform made him an untouchable king of the streets. He was dead wrong. In less than an hour, one arrogant, hate-fueled mistake would violently rip away his career, his freedom, and his pride. The city of Belleville was a sprawling, industrial Midwestern metropolis that was slowly trying to drag itself into a new era. The downtown area glittered with newly constructed glass high-rises and trendy coffee shops, but the South Side remained a gritty, hard-scrabble district where the shadows felt a little longer and the law felt a little looser. For years, Officer Brooks Teller had patrolled the South Side. He was a broad-shouldered man with a thick neck, a permanent scowl, and a deeply ingrained belief that the streets belonged to him. Teller wasn't just a cop, he was a predator in a uniform. Over his long tenure on the force, he had built a reputation as a bully who operated entirely above the law. He skimmed cash-off drug busts, planted evidence on teenagers who talked back to him, and terrorized local business owners under the guise of protection. In Teller's mind, he was the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. But in reality, he was the very chaos Belleville desperately needed to purge. The city had recently undergone a massive political shift. The citizens of Belleville had overwhelmingly elected a new mayor, Julian Voss. A former civil rights attorney and a Belleville native, Voss had campaigned aggressively on a platform of police reform and municipal accountability. I was a brilliant, highly educated black man who had promised to gut the corruption in the Belleville Police Department, specifically targeting the notorious 9th Precinct, Teller's home turf. Teller despised the new mayor. He despised the mandated body cameras, which he conveniently forgot to turn on. He despised the new use-of-force protocols. And most of all, he despised the idea that a man who wore custom-tailored suits in a downtown office thought he could tell a veteran street cop how to do his job. It was a biting, unusually cold evening. A steady drizzle was falling, turning the neon lights of the South Side corner stores into blurry streaks of red and blue on the wet asphalt. Teller was behind the wheel of his cruiser, chewing on a matchstick. Sitting in the passenger seat was Officer Tyler Boone, a young rookie who had only been on the street a short while. Boone was a good kid, eager to serve, but he was already growing deeply uncomfortable with his training officer's aggressive, often illegal tactics. "Quiet night," Boone noted, staring out the rain-streaked window. "Too quiet," Teller grunted, his eyes scanning the sidewalks like a hawk looking for a field mouse. "I don't like it. Means the rats are hiding. We need to remind them who owns this pavement." Teller wasn't looking to solve a crime tonight. He was looking to feed his ego. I needed someone to dominate, someone to remind him that despite the new mayor's soft-on-crime policies, Brooks Teller was still the ultimate authority. A few miles away, Mayor Julian Voss was also out in the rain. Voss had just wrapped up an exhausting day at City Hall, battling with the city council over the police department's budget. His head was pounding, and he needed air. Despite the protests of his chief of staff and his security detail, Voss had slipped out the back door of his private residence on the newly gentrified edge of the South Side. He wanted to feel the city he governed, completely unvarnished. He had stripped off his usual three-piece navy suit and changed into a faded dark gray athletic hoodie, a pair of black sweatpants, and running shoes. He pulled the hood up over his head to shield himself from the freezing drizzle and popped his wireless earbuds into his ears, listening to a jazz playlist as he jogged at a steady, rhythmic pace down Elm Street. In this moment, Julian Voss was not the most powerful man in Belleville. He was just a man enjoying a run in his own neighborhood, But as he rounded the corner onto 4th Avenue, a set of blinding headlights washed over him. Inside the cruiser, Teller's eyes locked onto the tall, hooded figure jogging through the rain. The veteran cop's prejudice flared instantly. "Look at this guy," Teller sneered, slowing the cruiser to a crawl. "Running in the rain at this hour. You see that, Boone?" Boone squinted through the windshield. "Looks like he's just exercising, Brooks. He's wearing running shoes. Nobody exercises in this neighborhood at this hour unless they're running from a crime scene," Teller said, his voice dripping with venomous certainty. "Look at him. Hood pulled up, hands near his pockets. He's probably casing the brownstones or just broke into a car." "Brooks, there haven't been any calls on the radio," Boone protested weakly, his stomach knotting. He knew exactly what Teller was doing. It was a textbook, baseless profile stop. "I don't need a dispatcher to tell me when I smell a rat, rookie," Teller snapped, throwing the cruiser into park and flipping on the flashing red and blue lights. The strobe effects illuminated the wet brick buildings, casting harsh shadows across the street. "Watch and learn how real police work is done." Teller shoved his door open, stepping out into the freezing rain, his hand aggressively resting on the butt of his service weapon. The trap was set. "Hey you! Stop right there!" Teller barked, his voice echoing off the concrete walls of the avenue. Julian Voss slowed his pace to a stop, mildly annoyed that his run was being interrupted. He reached up, pulling his hood back slightly, and took his right earbud out. He turned to face the blinding lights of the police cruiser. "Can I help you, officer?" Voss asked. His voice was deep, calm, and resonant. There was an innate authority in his tone, the kind of tone used to command boardrooms and press conferences. But Teller's arrogance completely blinded him to it. All Teller saw was a black man in a hoodie who wasn't cowering fast enough. "I said freeze and keep your hands where I can see them," Teller shouted, marching forward, closing the distance between them. Rookie Officer Boone trailed nervously a few steps behind, his hand hovering uncertainly near his radio. Voss stood perfectly still, his hands resting clearly at his sides. He was instantly aware of the dynamic. Before he was a mayor, he had been a defense attorney. He had spent his entire career reading police reports just like the one this officer was about to fabricate. He knew the danger he was in, but he also knew his rights. "My hands are visible, officer," Voss said evenly, locking eyes with Teller. "Is there a problem?" "The problem is you're out here creeping around in the dark," Teller growled, stopping just 2 feet from Voss. He shone his heavy, high-lumen tactical flashlight directly into Voss's eyes, attempting to blind and disorient him.
"Where are you coming from? Where are you going?" Voss did not flinch, though he had to squint against the glaring light. "I live about 4 blocks from here. I'm out for an evening jog. I wasn't aware that was a criminal offense in Belleville." Teller's jaw tightened. He hated it when people used big words. He hated the calm, unwavering confidence radiating from the man in front of him.
It felt like a direct challenge to his authority. "You got a smart mouth on you, boy," Teller sneered, intentionally using a deeply offensive, loaded term to try and provoke a reaction. Behind him, Boone visibly cringed. "Brooks, maybe we should just let him—" "Shut up, Boone," Teller barked over his shoulder, never taking his eyes off Voss. "I'm conducting an investigation. We've had a string of burglaries in this area." This was a complete lie. The South Side hadn't seen a residential burglary in weeks. "Give me your ID. Now." "I don't carry my wallet when I run," Voss replied smoothly. "I have my house keys and my phone. That's it." Under state law, unless you have reasonable, articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime, I am not required to provide identification, nor am I required to remain here. Teller's face turned crimson. The veins in his thick neck bulged against his collar. A citizen citing the law to him on the street was the ultimate insult. "You think you're a lawyer or something?" Teller spat, taking a threatening step forward, aggressively invading Voss's personal space. "Actually, yes, I am," Voss replied quietly, holding his ground. That was the breaking point for Teller. His ego, already bruised by the changing tides of the city's politics, snapped completely. Without warning, Teller lunged forward, grabbing Voss violently by the front of his hoodie. "Officer, what are you doing?" Voss demanded, his voice raising just enough to show force, but maintaining absolute composure. "I'm showing you who runs these streets," Teller roared, spinning Voss around and slamming him forcefully against the cold, wet hood of the police cruiser. The impact was loud, rattling the metal frame of the car. "Brooks, stop! He's not doing any—" Boone yelled, rushing forward, panic setting into the young rookie's eyes. "Back off, Boone! He's resisting," Teller lied at the top of his lungs, kicking Voss's legs apart so violently that the older man nearly lost his balance. "I am completely compliant," Voss stated loudly, ensuring that his voice carried down the street. "I am not resisting. You are committing a civil rights violation, and I highly recommend you call your watch commander before you take this any further." "I am the watch commander out here," Teller yelled, ripping his metal handcuffs from his belt. Across the street, the heavy glass door of an apartment complex pushed open. Lena Soto, an intensive care nurse who had just gotten off a brutal shift, was walking her golden retriever. The loud slam of a body hitting a car hood caught her attention. She looked over, her eyes widening as she saw the massive police officer manhandling a jogger. Without hesitating, Lena pulled her smartphone from her coat pocket, unlocked it, and hit record. She held it steady, capturing the flashing lights, the rain, and the clear abuse of power. Teller caught the movement in his peripheral vision. He snapped his head around, pointing his blinding flashlight at Lena. "Hey, put that phone away and get out of here!" Teller screamed, his voice raw with aggression. "This is an active police scene. You're interfering." Lena stood her ground on the sidewalk, the camera recording every frame. "I'm on a public sidewalk, officer," she called back, her voice shaking slightly but holding firm. "I have a First Amendment right to record you. You're hurting him for no reason. I'll lock you up for obstruction, you stupid—" Teller started to step toward her, but Voss's voice cut through the rain, sharp and commanding. "Leave their woman alone, officer. Your issue is with me." Teller spun back to Voss, furious that he had lost control of the situation. He grabbed Voss's wrists, twisting them painfully behind his back, and clamped the cold steel handcuffs down tight. The metallic clicks echoed in the quiet street like gunshots. "You're under arrest," Teller hissed into Voss's ear. "On what charge?" Voss asked, his face pressed against the wet metal of the hood. "Failure to identify, resisting arrest, and being a public nuisance," Teller spat. He grabbed Voss by the collar and aggressively marched him toward the rear door of the cruiser. He shoved the mayor of Belleville into the cramped, hard plastic back seat of the police car, slamming the door shut with a deafening thud. Teller turned to glare at Lena one last time, making a mock gun gesture with his fingers, before marching to the driver's side. He got in, completely oblivious to the catastrophic gravity of what he had just done. Boone slid into the passenger seat, his face ghostly pale. "Brooks, I don't think this is a good idea. We don't even know who that is." "I don't care who he is," Teller sneered, slamming the car into drive and peeling away from the curb, leaving Lena Soto standing in the rain, hitting upload to her social media accounts. "By the time I'm done processing him, he's going to wish he never stepped foot in my precinct." The interior of the cruiser smelled of stale sweat, cheap coffee, and ozone. The plastic partition separating the front seats from the back was covered in scratches. Through the grated window, Julian Voss sat in uncomfortable silence, his wrists aching from the tightness of the steel cuffs biting into his skin. The rain beat rhythmically against the roof of the car as they sped through the dark streets. Voss wasn't afraid. He was furious, yes. His heart was hammering a steady rhythm of righteous anger against his ribs. But more than that, he was calculating. He was gathering data. For months, he had been fighting with the police union, demanding that the department acknowledge the systemic rot within its ranks. The union leaders had continually pushed back, claiming that men like Brooks Teller were just tough cops doing a hard job, and that the stories of harassment and abuse were exaggerated by criminals. Now, the mayor had a front-row seat to the exact disease he was trying to cure. In the driver's seat, Teller was flying high on a power trip. He drove recklessly, blowing past 2 stop signs, taking sharp corners that sent Voss sliding against the hard plastic doors in the back. "You think you're pretty smart, huh?" Teller called back over his shoulder, his voice dripping with condescension. "Think you can quote the law to a guy who's been wearing this badge since you were in grade school? People like you are the problem with this city." Voss remained silent. He just stared at the back of Teller's thick neck. Boone, unable to handle the tension, finally spoke up, turning slightly toward the partition. "Hey man, do you have a name? If you just give us your name, we can clear this up at the station." "Don't beg him for his name, Boone," Teller snapped, slamming his hand against the steering wheel. "He's a nobody, just another punk who thinks the new rules protect him. You hear about the new mayor, Boone? Mayor Voss? Guy is trying to castrate this department. Wants to put civilians on a review board. Wants to take away our qualified immunity. It's a joke. He's a joke." Voss leaned slightly forward, his voice cutting cleanly through the ambient noise of the cruiser. "You seem to have a strong opinion of the mayor." Teller let out a bark of ugly laughter. "The mayor is a suit-wearing coward who doesn't know the first thing about the streets. If he ever came down to the south side without his armed guards, he'd wet his pants. But guys like him and guys like you think you own this town. You don't, I do." Voss absorbed the monologue, filing every word away. "Officer, I'd like your badge number." "You want my badge number?" Teller mocked, looking into the rearview mirror to catch Voss's eye. "It's 4402. Badge 4402. Memorize it. Write it down. Tattoo it on your forehead. Tell whoever you want. Tell the chief. Tell the mayor himself. See what happens. Nothing is going to happen to me because I am the wall that keeps the animals out." The cruiser took a final sharp turn, pulling into the gated concrete sallyport of the 12th precinct. The heavy metal garage door rumbled shut behind them, sealing them inside the sterile, brightly lit intake bay. Teller threw the car into park and killed the engine. He stepped out, strutting around to the back door, fully prepared to drag his captive into the booking area and parade his victory in front of the night shift. He yanked the door open and grabbed Voss by the arm, hauling him out of the vehicle. Keep your head down and your mouth shut," Teller ordered, giving Voss a rough shove toward the heavy steel doors leading to the precinct bullpen. Boone followed behind, looking as though he were walking to his own execution. His instincts were screaming at him that something was terribly, terribly wrong. Teller pushed open the double doors and marched Voss into the center of the bustling precinct. Telephones were ringing. Officers were typing away at clunky keyboards, and the smell of burnt coffee hung heavily in the air. Behind the raised wooden booking desk sat Desk Sergeant Declan Byrne. Byrne was a long-serving veteran, a man nearing retirement, who knew the face of every politician, judge, and public figure in the state. He was currently sipping from a ceramic mug, reviewing a stack of paperwork. "Hey, Declan," Teller called out, his voice booming with sickening bravado. "Got a live one for you. Resisting, failure to ID, Disorderly conduct. Fought me the whole way. Sergeant Byrne didn't look up immediately. Put him in cell 3, Brooks. I'll get the paperwork in a minute. Make sure you get him for a strip search, Teller added loudly, hoping to humiliate his prisoner further. He was acting real twitchy on the street. At that moment, Sergeant Byrne finally looked up from his paperwork to glance at the prisoner. His eyes locked on to the tall man in the dark gray hoodie. He saw the steel handcuffs clamped tightly around his wrists. He saw the water dripping from his face. And then he saw the man's eyes, piercing, intelligent, and unyielding. Byrne froze. The world in the precinct seemed to stop spinning. The ceramic coffee mug slipped from Byrne's fingers, plummeting toward the floor. It hit the linoleum with a sharp, violent crack, shattering into a dozen pieces, splashing dark brown liquid over the officer's polished boots. Byrne didn't even flinch at the mess. His mouth hung open. All the blood instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a corpse. "Brooks," Byrne whispered, his voice trembling so violently it barely carried over the desk. "Brooks. What? What have you done?" Teller frowned, misinterpreting the sergeant's terror for shock at the arrest. "What? I told you he's a punk who wouldn't comply. Decided he wanted to play lawyer." Before Byrne could formulate the words to explain the apocalyptic mistake Teller had just made, the heavy glass door to the precinct's inner offices swung open. Stepping out was Police Chief Wesley Thorne. Thorne was a no-nonsense, hard-nosed leader who had actually supported Voss's run for mayor, recognizing that the department needed a desperate cleansing. Walking beside the chief was Captain Amara Crow of Internal Affairs. They had been working late, reviewing the very budget proposals Mayor Voss had been debating earlier that day. Chief Thorne glanced down at the booking floor, intending to head to the coffee machine. His eyes swept over Teller, then Boone, and finally landed on the man in the handcuffs. Chief Thorne stopped dead in his tracks. Silence slammed into the bullpen like a physical shockwave. The ringing phones seemed to fade. The typing stopped. Every officer in the room who had bothered to look up was suddenly struck by the same paralyzing realization. The chief's face went from pale to a shade of violent, pulsing red in a matter of seconds. He bypassed the stairs entirely, vaulting down the 3 steps to the main floor, his boots hitting the linoleum with the heavy thud of an executioner's gavel. "Teller!" Chief Thorne roared. His voice was a thunderstorm that shook the very walls of the precinct. Teller stood up straighter, smiling slightly. "Evening, Chief. Just bringing in some garbage from the south side." Chief Thorne closed the distance, ignoring Teller entirely, and stopped directly in front of Julian Voss. The chief's eyes were wide with a mixture of absolute horror and blinding rage. "Mr. Mayor," Thorne breathed, his voice vibrating with disbelief. "Are you injured, sir?" Teller's brain short-circuited. It was as if someone had pulled the plug on his reality. The arrogant smirk on his face shattered, instantly replaced by a look of profound, suffocating terror. He looked at the man in the hoodie, then at the chief, then back at the man in the hoodie. "Mr. Mayor?" Julian Voss stood tall despite the handcuffs biting into his wrists. He looked directly at Chief Thorne, his expression devoid of panic, radiating absolute authority. "I have some bruising on my wrists, Chief, and my shoulder is strained from being slammed into a vehicle," Voss said calmly, his voice echoing in the dead silent room. "But I am otherwise unharmed." Thorne spun on Teller, his eyes practically glowing with fury. "Take those cuffs off the mayor of this city," Thorne ordered, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet hiss. "Now!" Teller's hands were shaking so violently he could barely find the key on his duty belt. "Chief, I didn't know who he was in a hoodie. I didn't have ID." "Shut your mouth and take the cuffs off, or I swear to God, I will break your fingers and do it myself, Thorne bellowed. Trembling like a leaf in a hurricane, Teller stepped behind Voss and fumbled with the lock. The click-click of the handcuffs releasing sounded like a death knell for Teller's career. Voss brought his arms forward, rubbing his chafed wrists. He did not look at Teller. He didn't need to. The predator had just stepped into a trap of his own making, and the jaws had just snapped shut. "Chief Thorne," Voss said, turning his gaze to the commanding officer. "Officer Brooks Teller, badge 4402, assaulted me, unlawfully detained me without reasonable suspicion, filed a false report verbally in my presence, and attempted to intimidate a civilian witness who recorded the entire interaction." Voss paused, letting the weight of his words crush the oxygen out of the room. He finally turned his head, locking his piercing eyes onto the trembling, hyperventilating, corrupt cop. "Officer Teller," the mayor said softly, but with a finality that chilled the room. "I believe you told me that you are the one who owns this town. Let's see how much of it you own from a jail cell." The silence that followed Mayor Julian Voss's words was heavy enough to crack the foundation of the 12th precinct. Every officer in the bullpen stood completely paralyzed, their eyes darting between the commanding presence of the city's highest elected official and the crumbling, pathetic posture of Officer Brooks Teller. Teller's chest heaved as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. The arrogant predator who had terrorized the South Side for years had vanished in the span of moments, replaced by a terrified, cornered animal. He looked desperately at Chief Thorne, his hands raised in a trembling gesture of surrender. "Chief, please," Teller stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine that made several nearby officers wince in second-hand embarrassment. It was a misunderstanding. It was dark. The rain. He was wearing a hoodie. You know how it is out there. You have to make split-second decisions. He refused to identify himself. He is under no legal obligation to identify himself without reasonable suspicion, you incompetent fool, Chief Thorne roared, the veins pulsing angrily at his temples. "Did you witness him commit a crime, Teller? Did you?" I suspected. Suspicion is not a crime." Captain Amara Crow of Internal Affairs finally stepped forward, her voice a cold, sharp blade cutting through Teller's frantic excuses. She had spent years trying to build a solid case against Teller, constantly thwarted by the blue wall of silence and his intimidating tactics. Now the man had served himself up on a silver platter. Captain Crow turned to the pale, shivering rookie standing near the doors. "Officer Boone, you were on the scene. Did the mayor resist arrest? Did he act aggressively?" Teller whipped his head around, his eyes wide and threatening, trying to silently command the young rookie to fall in line, to uphold the unspoken brotherhood of the streets. "Tell them, Boone," Teller growled, a desperate edge of menace in his tone. "Tell them how it went down." Tyler Boone looked at his training officer. For weeks, he had watched this man abuse citizens, steal money, and taint the badge Boone had worked so hard to earn in the academy. He looked at the mayor, who was standing quietly, offering no pressure, simply waiting for the truth. Boone swallowed hard, finding his spine. "No, Captain," the rookie said, his voice steadying. The mayor was completely compliant. Officer Teller initiated the stop without probable cause. He escalated the situation, used physical force without provocation, and fabricated the charges on the ride over here. Teller let out a howl of betrayal, lunging a half step toward the rookie. "You lying little rat! I'll kill you! I'll ruin you!" "Stand down, Teller," Chief Thorne barked, his hand dropping to his own service weapon. "He's lying," Teller screamed, completely losing his grip on reality. "He's trying to save his own skin. It's his word against mine. The dash cam was off. I made sure—" Teller clamped his mouth shut, realizing too late what he had just confessed. Captain Crow smiled, a terrifying, predatory expression. "You made sure the dash cam was off? That sounds premeditated." "Officer Teller, it doesn't matter," Boone interrupted, reaching up to tap the small black square mounted to the center of his uniform chest. "Because my body cam was on. I manually activated it the second Officer Teller stepped out of the cruiser. I recorded the whole thing, Captain. Clear audio and HD video." Teller's knees physically buckled. He staggered backward, catching himself on the edge of the booking desk. He had spent his entire career manipulating the system, exploiting the gaps in the technology, and bullying his partners into silence. He never imagined that a young rookie would possess the moral courage to secretly document his corruption. But the nightmare was only just beginning. On the booking desk, Sergeant Declan Burns' phone began to ring, then the secondary line rang. Then the precinct's main dispatch lines lit up like a Christmas tree. Across the room, half a dozen desk phones began buzzing simultaneously. Byrne, his hands shaking, picked up his receiver. 12th Precinct, Sergeant Byrne. He listened for a few seconds, his eyes widening. "Yes, sir. Sir, he's here now." "Yes, sir." Byrne hung up and looked at the chief. "Chief, that was the governor's office." Before Thorne could respond, a young desk officer shouted from across the bullpen. "Chief, you need to turn on the television, now, Channel 4. Thorne grabbed a remote from a nearby desk and pointed it at the flat-screen TV mounted in the corner of the room, switching it from a sports recap to the local news affiliate. The screen showed the unmistakable rain-soaked footage recorded by Lena Soto, the intensive care nurse. The angle was perfect. The audio was crystal clear. Every viewer in the state could hear the mayor calmly asserting his rights. They could hear Teller's racist, derogatory tone. They watched in high-definition horror as Teller violently slammed the highest elected official in the city against the hood of the cruiser and slapped the cuffs on him. The news anchor's voice played over the footage, trembling with shock. "We are receiving this video live from social media, where it has already amassed over 2 million views. Belleville Mayor Julian Voss appears to have been brutally and unlawfully arrested by a city police officer. The FBI Civil Rights Division in Chicago has just issued a statement that they are opening an immediate civil rights investigation." Teller stared at the television screen. The walls of the precinct were closing in on him. In less than an hour, he had gone from the untouchable king of the South Side to the most hated man in America. "You didn't just break the law, Brooks," Chief Thorne said, his voice dropping to a whisper of absolute disgust. "You broke this department." The chief turned to Captain Crow. "Captain, relieve him of his duty." Crow stepped forward, her eyes locked onto Teller. "Officer Brooks Teller, by order of the Chief of Police, you are hereby suspended without pay, effective immediately. Surrender your weapon and your badge." Teller didn't move. I was completely catatonic, his brain unable to process the sheer velocity of his own destruction. "Do it, or I will have you physically stripped," Crow commanded. Slowly, with trembling, numb fingers, Teller unbuckled his heavy leather duty belt. The holster, the extra magazines, the taser, the tools of his tyranny, clattered to the linoleum floor. He reached up, his fingers lingering over the silver shield pinned to his chest. Badge 4402. The shield he had hidden behind for years. With a sickening rip of fabric, he pulled it free and dropped it onto the booking desk. "Now," Chief Thorne said, looking at a nearby pair of veteran officers who had long despised Teller's tactics. "Arrest him." The two officers stepped forward instantly, grabbing Teller by his arms. "Brooks Teller, you are under arrest for aggravated assault, false imprisonment, official misconduct, and deprivation of civil rights under color of law," Captain Crow recited, stepping in close so Teller could hear every single syllable. You have the right to remain silent. God knows I highly suggest you use it. A cold pair of steel handcuffs. Teller's own handcuffs. The very ones he had used on the mayor just earlier were snapped brutally tight around his wrists. "Sergeant Byrne," Mayor Voss spoke up, his voice echoing in the quiet room. "Yes, Mr. Mayor?" Byrne replied quickly, standing at attention. Voss looked at the weeping, broken man being held by his former colleagues. "I believe Officer Teller requested that his prisoner be put in cell 3. See to it that his request is honored." Byrne nodded grimly. "Right away, sir. Cell 3. Solitary." As Teller was dragged away toward the holding cells, sobbing openly, stripped of his power, his pride, and his freedom, he looked back one last time. I saw Mayor Julian Voss shaking hands with rookie officer Tyler Boone, thanking the young man for his integrity. That was the last time Brooks Teller would ever see the main floor of a police precinct. The fallout was biblical. By sunrise, the Department of Justice had taken over the investigation. State Attorney General Serafina Hale personally spearheaded the prosecution, refusing to offer a single plea deal. When investigators raided Teller's locker and home, they found stashes of stolen cash, illegal narcotics meant for planting, and a journal detailing years of extortion. The blue wall of silence completely shattered. Realizing the federal government was involved, dozens of officers came forward to testify against Teller to save their own careers. Months later, Mayor Julian Voss stood at a podium in the newly renovated plaza of City Hall. The sun was shining brightly over Belleville. "True justice is not about revenge," Voss spoke into the microphones of a dozen national news networks. "It is about accountability. For too long, the citizens of this city have lived in fear of the very people sworn to protect them. Today, that era officially ends." That same morning, in a federal courtroom downtown, United States District Judge Percival Hale stared down at a disgraced, shackled Brooks Teller. Stripped of his uniform, wearing a bright orange jumpsuit, Teller looked remarkably small. The swagger was gone. The predator had been entirely consumed by the justice system he once mocked. "Brooks Teller," Judge Hale declared, his gavel raised, "for your egregious abuse of power, your violent assault on an innocent citizen, and your years of documented corruption, I sentence you to 12 years in the United States Penitentiary in Leavenworth, Kansas. You will serve every day of this sentence without the possibility of early parole." The gavel slammed down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Teller was led out of the courtroom, head bowed, tears streaming down his face. He was transported to Leavenworth, where he was placed in permanent protective custody, forced to spend nearly every hour of every day in a concrete box for his own safety. Back in Belleville, the 12th Precinct underwent a massive overhaul. Under Mayor Voss's new oversight committee, body cameras became strictly mandatory and unalterable. Rookie officer Tyler Boone was given a commendation for his bravery and assigned to a new elite community policing task force. Brooks Teller thought his badge made him a god. But in the end, it was the very law he swore to uphold that built his cage, proving once and for all that no man, no matter how loud he shouts, is above the truth. Karma has a flawless memory and a perfect sense of timing. Brooks Teller's story is a chilling reminder that true power isn't found in a badge or a gun, but in the integrity of your actions. Arrogance will always build its own trap. It just takes the right moment for the jaws to snap shut. If you were captivated by this story of justice and poetic retribution, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more incredible true-to-life stories.